April the 25th, 1915, men of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps landed at Gallipoli. It was on that day the traditions of our fighting forces were born. These stories of their sons and daughters at war we proudly dedicate to the memory of Anzac. This is the story of a great battle fought in a malarial swamp. This is the story of the Allies' first major victory against the Japanese. In appalling conditions, Australians fought until, of a Japanese invasion force of 18,000, less than 6,000 escaped destruction. This was victory in Carpet. This is the story of Gona and Buna. Landing at Gona in July 1942, the Japanese in 2 months pushed across the Owen Stanleys almost to Port Moresby. By the end of November, the AIF had fought them back along the Kokoda Trail. Then in December 1942 and January 1943, there followed the battles of the beachheads to sweep the Japanese out of Papua. These were the battles of Gona, Buna, and Sanananda. In 38 days of fighting advance along the Kokoda Trail, men of the 6th and 7th Divisions drove through the strong enemy defense lines at Eora Creek and entered Kokoda. While the 16th Brigade attacked frontally at Gorari, the 25th encircled the Jap rearguard and broke it at the point of the bayonet. The Battle of the Kokoda Trail was won. Now the Battle of the Beachheads was to begin. The 25th Brigade of the 7th Division from Kokoda were to press on to Gona. The 6th Division Brigade was to advance through Popondetta and Saputa to Sanananda. One American force landing at Oro Bay was to attack Buna. It would be joined by an airborne American force flown into Dobadura to attack Buna from inland. The battle plan began at Oro Bay. Captain T. Grahamslaw, former district officer at Buna, guided an Australian patrol as they paddled up the coast to reconnoiter Oro Bay months before the attack was to go in. The task of this small party was to make contact with the local natives who knew Grahamslaw and begin to establish a supply base. The next step was to bring forward American and Australian soldiers. American engineers were to improve the base while Australian commandos of the 2nd 6th Independent Company probed towards Buna. A stream of supplies began to arrive by sea. Rapidly, Oro Bay, 25 miles southeast of Buna, became a springboard for the next plunge forward. Meanwhile, the commandos had moved up the coast to locate the enemy's forward positions and test his strength. Even these tough and seasoned diggers must have been appalled at the evil-smelling, malignant country they encountered. A Papuan infantry patrol confirmed the commandos' impressions. This would be a grim struggle. General Blamey, in overall command, and America's General McNider supervised the build-up of Allied strength. Blamey had a word for everyone. For the first time, Australians and Americans would fight together. Good air supply would be vital, for the Japanese were well supplied by sea. At Wanagila and other strips, the Allies worked day and night to develop bases for the all-important shuttle service from Port Moresby over the Owen Stanleys to the front-line area. In this campaign, troops were flown to battle for the first time in New Guinea. The air airlift had begun in October, when South Australian veterans of the Milne Bay victory were flown in to occupy Wonagila. With this strip secured, the build-up went on apace. Lieutenant General Herring, commanding battle operations, and General McNider knew that it was a race against time. Every plane load of soldiers brought the day of attack closer. But haunting the generals was the knowledge that overwhelming enemy reinforcements were standing by in Rabaul. The first American troops reached Wonagila on October the 16th. They were militiamen without battle experience or jungle training. By November, a division of them was in position to join the AIF drive against the perimeter. At Port Moresby, Allied strength coiled itself like a spring awaiting release. Australian reserve formations rested and fit, prepared for a return match with the enemy. Movement orders sped unit after unit to the airfields for the flight across the Owen Stanleys to the front line. At this stage, they must have thought that this was an easier war. Days of tramping the Kokoda Trail were over. Blaney hastened the build-up. He knew these men who were flying into battle, knew their stamina and nerve, but he also knew what faced them. First, a perilous flight. A flight through a mountain gap in cloud and storm. These aircrew risked their lives daily. Then would come a campaign very different from the desert battles of the Middle East. This would be siege warfare, trench fighting on the murderous pattern of World War I, fought in reeking ooze against an unseen enemy. They would need all the ammunition they could take with them, all that Blaney could send them, for this war of attrition. Ahead of them, the 16th Brigade and the 25th Brigade were driving the enemy to the coast. Now he must be driven into the sea before help could reach him from Rabaul. Not a day could be lost. Plans had been laid. Now the battle could begin. The Australian Air Force had a vital responsibility now that the war had moved out of the mountains down to the coast. Squadrons like number 75 flying Kitty Hawks were needed for air cover. Bomber squadrons had to blast enemy strong points with their Bostons before the ground forces attacked. But the urgent bomber task was to cut enemy communications with Rabaul. As yet, the enemy controlled the sea approaches to Papua. Only our bombers could turn back his reinforcements and break his supply line. They did the job. They found and strafed his ships and barges sneaking along the coast. They struck at his air strength at Buna repeatedly and accurately. With every airstrike on land or at sea, his soldiers became more vulnerable. By late December, we controlled the air. He was cornered, but not beaten. He had an ally, the country itself. On land, our attack had bogged down in swamp. The Australians were not only fighting a hedgehog of machine gun posts, they were fighting malaria, dengue, dysentery, and scrub typhus. In this country, the enemy could be invisible at 25 yards. From observation posts above the morass, our men strove to pinpoint each center of last-ditch resistance, to tell our bombers and artillery where to concentrate their attack. From ground to air went the briefings. Down came the bombardments. But only direct hits were effective. These were black weeks. Enemy bombers could strike at the Allies, but the enemy's hidden defenses seemed invulnerable. At Buna, the American attack was halted. On the coast, Australian commandos fighting with them directed the fire of Australian mountain guns, but the Japanese defense line held. The main American attack was stymied. Only at Gona was their success. Here the Kokoda Trail veterans, the Australian 7th Division and 39th Militia Battalion, planned and carried through a sustained advance. With the assistance of the RAAF's new Army Cooperation Wirraway Squadron, they broke through to the coast against fanatical enemy resistance. In two bitter battles at Gona Village and Gona Mission, their Hurricane assault routed the enemy flank. December the 9th, 1942 brought victory. Gona's gone, came the triumphant signal. On the Buna flank, the Australian 18th Brigade, led by Brigadier Wootton, moved in beside the Americans. With them were 8 tanks of the 2nd 6th Australian Armoured Regiment. These 14-ton General Stewarts, armed with a 37mm quick-firing gun in the turret and a Browning machine gun, were the crux of Wootton's assault plan. Captain Kidd, 14.5 feet high, and Captain Gore, capable of 40 miles an hour, and others, were to smash a way for the Queenslanders and South Australians of the 18th Brigade into the defences surrounding Buna's 2 airstrips. These veterans of the Milne Bay victory still had scores to settle with the Japanese. The New South Welshmen manning the tanks longed for their first action. At dawn on December the 18th, tanks moved forward. They were to take the enemy utterly by surprise. Behind the tanks, the 2nd 9th Queenslanders advanced through Europa Plantation. A signalman attached to air support signals alerts the pilots of No. 4 Army Cooperation Squadron, who will be over the battlefield, spotting for the supporting artillery barrage. These intrepid pilots did their job at treetop level. One, Pilot Officer Jack Archer, actually shot down a Zero. At a word from them, the guns opened up. The enemy had heavy guns concentrated in these mangrove islands. Their long-range shelling could hold up the tank attack, so the Allies attacked them first. Meanwhile, the infantry waited. Americans attacked on the flank, and the advance began, led by the tanks with sirens screaming. This was not tank country, yet in a few hours these tanks wrecked 13 strong posts. Onward rumbled the tanks, trampling the enemy. Only the terrain could hold them. The Wirraways unleashed the artillery. Casualties among the attacking infantry were heavy. The wounded were carried back, but the attack surged forward. Some Japanese ran from the tanks, but none surrendered. Every foxhole had to be overcome with grenade and bayonet, but the steady impetus of the advance never slackened. By December the 22nd, the South Australians and an American battalion had seized the swamp approaches to the enemy's main strip. In 4 days, the 18th Brigade had overrun 98 strong posts. Now they drove wedges to split the enemy perimeter into isolated sections. Further west, the Americans advanced beyond Buna village. The end was near, but at terrible cost. The 18th Brigade lost 306 killed, 557 wounded. In trenches like these, the Japanese fought like wild animals, while their own dead and dying mounted around them. Very few of the wounded Japanese survived as prisoners. The Allies carried them to their field hospitals, cared for them as for their own wounded. These Japs were the lucky ones. Perhaps they thought themselves unlucky. Unlucky not to have been killed with so many of their comrades. Unlucky not to have escaped with their senior officers to fight and in the main perish in the Allied victories which lay ahead. Allied doctors worked unceasingly in fever-laden heat. The slightest wound could turn to gangrene. In makeshift hospitals, sometimes under the sky, they worked the clock round to save life. Rested, troops rested. But there was no real rest in this jungle war. The battle to keep healthy was unending. At least you could relax, have a smoke, swap yarns, grumble a bit, wonder what's happened at home. Above all, eat. Hot food, real food with time to eat it. Time for bunched muscles to slacken, for nerves to quieten. Time to breathe deeply. Time to watch prisoners being led in for interrogation. Time to enjoy victory. The little beggars don't look so cheeky now. Then Blamey came to congratulate the victors. With him was General Eichelberger, a great American commander. General MacArthur gave him the frontline American command after the first U.S. reversals. Inspecting shell-torn Buna and its trophies, he must have recalled MacArthur's order. I want you to take Buna or not come back alive. Now Buna was at peace. The living could honor the dead. With Gona and Buna captured, the Japanese fell back on Sanananda, their last beachhead in Papua. On the shore of this desolate bay, 6,000 cornered Japanese fought ferociously to stave off defeat. Their last stand was made on an island surrounded by swamps and approached only on narrow fronts, swept by machine gun fire. Day after day, Allied patrols vainly sought ways to advance, but every observation post reported that it had to be a frontal attack. The last cleanup would be yard by yard over broken, steaming ground, through the sago swamps, and then along the coast. Australians and Americans fought in relays along the Sanananda track. After New South Welshmen of the 16th Brigade had been bled white, Americans took over the attack. The Australian 7th Division Cavalry relieved them. With each fresh wave of troops, the Allied positions inched forward. Then the victorious 21st Brigade arrived from Gona. American engineers came up from Buna. The Allied advance began to gather momentum. Remnants of the cracked 6th and 7th Division units joined the American militiamen for one more assault. Americans carried Australian wounded to American hospitals. Australians cared for American wounded. The Allies fought as one force. Casualties grew heavier. One 400-yard advance cost Australia 40 dead. Papuan natives helped the wounded, often under fire. Camps like this were strung along the trail. American camps, Australian camps, feeding the vital supplies forward. This jeep hit a landmine. One casualty was a photographer recording the campaign. News from the front was bad. The attack was slowing down again. Then General Vasey, commanding the 7th Division, planned the knockout blow. Brigadier Wotton's 18th Brigade, though sadly depleted by its triumphant assault on Buna, would strike at Sanananda through the swamp. While the 18th Brigade advanced, fresh American troops renewed the fight for the track. This sniper died sooner than surrender. Few prisoners were taken in this battle. Into the kunai clumps bordering the swamps moved the Australian flank attack. On January the 10th, the men of the 18th Brigade awaited the signal to attack. Some slept while their mates got a meal ready. An army marches on its stomach, and none knew it better than the victors of Milne Bay and Buna. Here in the wilderness between jungle and swamp, the Queenslanders and South Australians of this never-to-be-forgotten fighting brigade waited to throw the last of the enemy into the sea. On January the 11th, they advanced. They advanced into a battlefield of stinking liquid ooze. This was the approach to Sanananda. January the 12th. The joint Allied attack was ready. 0 hour approached. The surprise attack succeeded. On January the 21st, resistance ceased, and Vasey, Wotton, and Herring stood at Sanananda Bay. The victors, Wotton of the 18th Brigade, Herring commanding Allied land forces in Papua, Vasey commanding Australia's 7th Division. Now these men and their American allies could inspect the last Japanese bridgehead in Papua, which had been crushed by the 18th Brigade's lightning advance, unsurpassed in the annals of war. Now Papua was at peace again. None contributed more to win peace than the Papuan villagers or the Papuan infantry. Australia has a debt to these loyal fuzzy-wuzzy angels that can never be fully repaid. Thus Japan, mighty in the Far East, which had planned to conquer a Pacific empire, met its first major defeat and began its retreat towards surrender. On these beachheads, Japan's spearhead shattered against the Allied shield. In this Pacific War turning point, 31,000 Australians and 9,000 Americans fought, suffered, won together. The 18th Brigade lost 96% of its strength in battle and from fever. Yet No soldier reported sick with a temperature of less than 103 degrees. In 66 days of battle, Australia lost 1,500 killed, 2,500 wounded, and 6,500 evacuated sick. This was the Battle of the Beachheads, when Australians and Americans, united by a common ideal, fought and conquered to defend democracy, in the tradition of Anzac.